Hello and welcome. Today we're discussing moral accountability from Chapter 9 of Kernohan's Business Ethics. Core questions we're dealing with are: who is responsible for the consequences of a decision? When are motivations or character traits morally relevant? And perhaps most controversially, can a whole organization be morally responsible? So let's begin with a distinction. Causal responsibility is about what caused an outcome. Moral responsibility is about who should be held ethically accountable. This distinction is here because you can cause something and not be morally responsible. And sometimes you can be morally responsible for something you didn't directly cause, especially if your intentions or neglect contributed to it. This is where the is-ought gap shows up again. Just because something is causally linked to you does not mean that you ought to be punished or blamed for it, and vice versa. The kinds of justice we apply in these situations matters, and if you will recall, there are three kinds. Retributive justice deals with punishment, compensatory justice deals with restitution or repayment, and distributive justice handles fairness in distribution. Moral accountability sits closest to retributive and compensatory justice, but it's more than just legal, it's ethical. To assign responsibility, we often rely on prediction. Could someone reasonably have predicted the outcomes of their actions? And we also consider necessary conditions, things that must be present for the event to occur, and sufficient conditions, things that guarantee the event. Kernohan introduces the NESS condition, a necessary element of a sufficient set. So someone might be responsible if their action is one necessary element in a larger sufficient condition that caused harm. But sometimes events are overdetermined. That is, multiple sufficient causes exist. If many people each do something harmful, and it would have happened regardless of any one of them acting, is each one morally accountable? What about this excuse? Well, if I didn't do it, somebody else would have. This line of thinking collapses moral responsibility into a game of outcomes, and it ignores your personal duty. Your ethics don't vanish just because someone else might make the same immoral choice. Keep in mind that the "if not me, then someone else" attitude can be applied to war crimes, drug dealing, even online platforms that enable pedophiles. Sure enough, if you don't design that platform, someone else will. But the real question is, do you want to be the person who enables pedophiles or war crimes? Take voting, for example. One vote usually doesn't decide the election, but it doesn't make your choice morally irrelevant. The excuse, "my vote doesn't matter," misses the point, because it's not about effectiveness, it's about doing your part. Being morally responsible applies even when your personal action isn't causally decisive, because in aggregate, these actions are decisive, and the alternative sounds little better than "everybody else was doing it." That didn't fly with your parents when you were 12, and it doesn't fly in ethics. Let's talk law for a second. Businesses and individuals can be legally liable, which is mostly about incentives. Fines and punishments are designed to get businesses to pay attention to harm, not to assign moral blame. However, we should note that when fines are the only punishment, the law seems to exist only for poor people. And when fines are significantly less than the profit generated from the crime, the fine becomes merely a tax. Case in point, the 5-Hour Energy product was found guilty of being intentionally misleading in their advertisements, and they were fined $4.3 million, quite a bit. But they were making around $1 billion annually because of that advertising. So the fine was a mere 0.5% of annual revenue. And that sort of a fine is, frankly, a very low tax to continue doing what you're doing. Or if we look at Congress members trading stocks, there is no penalty for doing so with effectively insider information, since they know the laws that they're about to pass and how those laws will affect the market. But if they don't report trades over $1,000 within 45 days of making those trades, there is a $200 fine. Now, if you look at something like the Pelosi tracker, you'll notice that it has 54% returns, actually more like 700% returns, but that's fine. And then you compare it to the S&P 500 over the same time period, which gives you 23% returns. And the Pelosi tracker even outperforms legendary Warren Buffett by at least a full 15%. So what about moral blame for organizations? Can a company, a non-person, have a moral character? Kernohan explores this through promise-keeping, corporate culture, and the values expressed in policies and decisions. If a business is consistently unethical, can we say that the company itself is morally accountable, or do we only blame individuals? What if no individual actually signed off, but the system enabled the behavior? And what about the kinds of businesses that seem specifically geared to exploit people, from gambling to payday loans? On to the chain of command. Let's look at the employee side of things. What do you do if your supervisor tells you one thing, but company policy or even the law says another? Are you more responsible to your boss, your company, your customers, or society? What if doing your job well causes harm? And what if being ethical gets you fired? You see, the chain of command provides a whole host of very tricky cases, because quite often orders are not explicit, they are inferred. In fact, if we take a look at Nazi Germany, we will note that Hitler never wrote explicit orders for concentration camps or extermination. George W. Bush never gave direct orders for the Abu Ghraib prison torture. And a mob boss does not give detailed instructions about what to do with Steve's family. He just says something like, "I think someone should solve our Steve problem." In all these cases, no explicit instruction is given, but the meaning is understood. These are implied directives. They create an environment where subordinates act immorally, but leaders remain clean on paper. So is the leader still morally accountable? So who do we hold responsible? The person who gave the order, the person who followed it, the system that allowed it? Moral accountability isn't just about what happens, but about what people should have done based on their knowledge, role, and capacity to act. It's about the tension between individual ethics and institutional roles. So here's a closing question for you. Who do you think is the most responsible when an organization causes harm? The top level executives, middle managers, the culture, the policies? Or is responsibility spread too thin to actually land anywhere? Let me know what you think, and thanks for being here.